Welcome everyone, and thank you for tuning into today's webinar, Insider's Guide to College Rankings. We are super excited to have Evelyn Alexander join us today. Evelyn is a certified educational planner with Magellan College Counseling. I'll pass it over to her in just a few minutes for a proper introduction. But before I do that, I want to briefly share how Revolution Prep helps students. Since 2002, Revolution Prep has helped over 1 million families create pathways to college, broaden career opportunities, and teach skills that drive a passion for learning. With a confidence-building curriculum based on growth mindset, research out of Stanford University, and the only roster of full-time professional tutors, our sole focus is demonstrating what's possible when students put in the work necessary to achieve their fullest potential. Before we get started, if you have any questions for Evelyn today, please submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Please know that this webinar is hosted by Revolution Prep and should not be viewed as an endorsement for the solutions offered by Evelyn. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Evelyn.
Hi, everyone. I'll wait for the applause to die down. Just kidding. Thank you, Liz, so much for hosting me to do this webinar again. I did this last year, and there are a couple changes from last year, if anybody was with us. I think that, well, let me give you just a quick introduction on myself. As Liz said, I am a certified educational planner. That means I took a big, long exam, and I do lots of professional development activities to maintain my professionalism and my skills. So for example, I am getting on a plane in 4 hours, and heading to the East Coast. I'm in California, heading to the East Coast to visit a couple colleges. I do that regularly throughout the course of the year. I probably visit between 25 and 35 colleges a year. It's really important, if you're planning on working with someone outside of your school counselor, it's important that you work with someone who is qualified to give you the advice that they're giving you. This is a very fast moving industry. It is an industry, we all recognize that. And that sort of leads into my intro for what we're going to talk about today. And that is that this whole college admissions scandal that we saw a couple weeks ago unveiled is really founded on the underpinning belief that some parents have that if you don't get your child into a top college, the rest of their life will be meaningless and they'll never make any money or have a job that, you know, gives them any fulfillment. And nothing could be further from the truth. And so I am really glad to be doing this today and to help you understand what goes into those rankings. I'm specifically going to talk about the US News and World Report rankings, but there are, as I'm sure you know, several different sets of rankings. Some have information that's really, really useful to you, and some you should really know what goes into the rankings before you base a lot of decisions on them. So next slide. So I sort of compare the rankings to Yelp. Have you ever pulled up Yelp and to look for a restaurant to go to, and you read all the reviews and everybody is giving bad reviews and you think, that's weird, I've been to this restaurant before. How come everybody disagrees with me? And the reason is because Yelp is subjective. And it's people's opinions, and it's opinions that you may not share. Because people may not have the same taste as you. And the truth is the rankings are kind of similar. You'll see in a moment as we get into it that the rankings have a lot of room in them for opinion. So I'd encourage you to think of rankings as one source of information about colleges, but not the key source of information. Which should truthfully be much more personalized to your child and his or her college search. So next slide. So we're going to go into, this is the kind of the meat of what I want to talk to you about today. And you'll see in this slide and the next slide, and I think that Revolution Prep will make this webinar available after, a recording of it afterwards. So you can come back and take a look at this. But between this slide and the next slide, you'll see that I'm going to tell you 100% of what goes into the methodology that US News and World Report uses. So this first item is what they call expert opinion. And what they do is the US News and World Report sends out questionnaires to college administrators and high school counselors. And when I say administrators, I mean college presidents, college provosts, and admission officers. And you'll see in the bullet point here that they get about a 35.5% response. So about a third, a little more than a third. And that's from the academic experts. They don't report the response that they get from high school counselors. And I can tell you, and I dug deeply into this year and compared it with what they did last year. Last year, the response rate for high school counselors was below 10%. It was a very, very small number of high school counselors whose opinion they are asking. They literally ask, you know, of all the colleges in the country, and by the way, there's 2,200 four-year colleges, what's your opinion of, you know, who should be where in the rankings? It's very, very subjective. And so I kind of relay it back to fast food. You know, if you ask the president of, if you ask the president of Staples if he thought that which was better, Staples or Office Depot, what do you think he's going to say? He's going to say Staples. So it's not like you're getting really good objective information when you ask people what their opinion is, especially when you think about the job of a college president and a college provost and a college admissions director. It's not to travel around the country and investigate other colleges. In fact, I probably go to more colleges than college presidents go to in a year. It's to run their institution. And frankly, for college presidents, their job is to raise money for their institution. So the one thing I would say about this expert opinion factor is it was 22% last year, and now it's slightly lower than that. It's 20% because you'll see on the next slide, they're trying to bring in some additional information this year. It's still a fifth of the methodology of the rankings, which is a very large chunk of how they create them. So the next item is graduation and retention rates, and graduation rates may or may not be what you think they mean. So colleges report to the federal government their 4-year and 6-year graduation rates. And it's going to take both of those into account. So it's literally what percentage of a class that matriculates in a given year has completed a degree 4 years later and then 6 years later. And retention, this is actually a very important aspect to me when I work with private clients. Retention rates means the number of students who start freshman year and then come back sophomore year. So I always say to my clients, when you go to college, out of every 10 people who you meet freshman year, how many of them do you want to come back for your second year? Well, the higher the better, you know, like 8 out of 10 would be great. So graduation and retention rates, honestly, I think, are a decent measure of a college's quality, but it still doesn't tell you all that you need to know. So it's important for you to know that, again, this is more than a fifth of the methodology. So student excellence is something that changed from last year, and I'm thinking I probably would have noted if that 10% were different from last year. So I think that the 10% is the same as last year, but last year they included test scores and class rank and acceptance rate. And I want to talk just a moment about acceptance rate. And I do think it's interesting that US News removed it from their methodology this year. But for those of you who are the parents of sophomores or juniors, freshman parents, you might not have experienced this yet. But if you have a sophomore or a junior, your child is probably getting boatloads of mail and email, and you might be getting email in your inbox as well, because your students who have taken the PSAT have given their data to the College Board, and guess what? The College Board sells that information to the colleges. So I hate to say this, but just because you get an email from a highly ranked college, and I could name a few, but there are definitely a few superstar standouts in the top 25 who buy boatloads of data, and they send out tons of emails, tons. And my clients usually send me these emails and they say, oh my God, I'm getting an email from blah, blah, blah. Does that mean anything? Is that a good thing? So here's the thing, when acceptance rate was included in this methodology, think about what colleges are incentivized to do. What are they incentivized to do? reduce their acceptance rate. Well, if you have a static number of seats in your freshman class, how do you move your acceptance rate lower? You puff up your applicant pool. So when you get those emails and when you get that mail, please understand that that's the reasoning for that. I think it's interesting that US News has removed acceptance rate from the methodology. I don't think it's going to reduce the amount of mail or email that you're going to get. So sorry about that. But test scores and class rank are an indication of the level of performance of students at any one particular school. The question is, again, how much is that important to you? And it's not something that you can't determine yourself. So it's very easy to look up a college's, the middle 50% of their admitted students. I'll do it this way. And when I say middle 50%, every college reports, well, most colleges who require test scores report the middle 50% of their admitted class. And what does middle 50% mean? 25% got lower and 25% got higher. Okay. And Liz, remind me, I'm going to do questions at the end. Is that right?
Yes, at the end.
Okay. All right. So I do see all of your questions as they're coming through, and we'll do all of them at the end. Okay. So test scores, class rank. Class rank is a really interesting thing. Some schools don't rank at all. I live in Southern California. Most of the public schools in my immediate area do not rank, do not provide a class rank. Many colleges prefer and very openly seek students from high schools that rank because of this item. And what that really means, what the fact that class rank is included in this student excellence item means is US News asks what percent of your freshman class was in the top 10% of their graduating high school class. So what does that mean? Colleges are incentivized to admit students who have a rank that is in the top 10%. Again, I'm just providing the information. You can decide how important this is for you and your child's college search. Okay, this last item on the first slide, and keep in mind, where are we now? 42, 52. With just the 4 items on this slide, we're at 60% of the methodology. 60% of the data that goes into the rankings, you're looking at it. So graduation rates, now this is different than the previous item that we talked about, and here's why. I find this one sort of perplexing. And this was included last year, but I think it was about 5% last year. So US News has an estimation of what each college's expected graduation rate should be. It's probably based on, the past 5 years running. And if a college outperforms or underperforms that number, that data is factored into the rankings. So what that kind of does is it puts a lot of pressure on colleges to keep their graduation rates at least where they are and have been, and not slip. Personally, I think that's a good thing. When you send your child away to college, you want them to graduate in 4 years. You wouldn't want them to take longer than you expect, based on what the college has been reporting in the past. All right, so that's the first 60%. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is some good stuff here. I like the faculty resources item, and here's what that really means. Although 20% again is a very large chunk of the methodology. So faculty resources could be how much faculty are paid. It also could factor in how much grant money they win. So faculty members at degree granting universities generally write grants. Sometimes it's to the federal government, sometimes it's to private foundations, but they're always trying to bring in money to do whatever research they're doing. So how does this impact you as an undergraduate, or your child as an undergraduate? In every discipline, you could do research. So I was a political science major, and I did research with a faculty member, researching information for a book that he was writing when I was in college. Most people think that research is only for science students, but it's very much not true. It can be, research can be done in any discipline. So the amount of money that a college has available to dedicate to the faculty, as opposed to other places where they dedicate their money is, I think it's an important part of whether or not the college has the ability to provide the educational experience that you as a parent are seeking for your child. Excuse me for just a moment. Okay, so now we've hit 70%, and 70 or 80%, 60, 70, 80, oh, that's 80. And now we're down to the last 20%. So 10% is average spending per student. And this number, I think, is, I have a little bit of trouble with this number. So, and maybe it's because I spend so much time touring college campuses, but I can tell you from what I see, the newest, shiniest buildings on campus are generally the science labs and the business building. And in most schools, the wellness center or the athletic center is usually on the newer side, and it's usually pretty spiffy, depending on, you know, which college you're talking about. Obviously, there's 2,200 colleges, they're at all different levels. But the reason I don't think that average spending per student is necessarily a fair indicator of what kind of, again, what are we looking for? What kind of educational experience is your child going to have on this campus? If you're a political science major like I was, a brand new engineering building really doesn't mean anything to me. A brand new gym or wellness center, yeah, I'm going to spend some time there. But if I were a kinesiology major, that would make a big difference. A brand new business building isn't going to make a whit of difference to me. I would never have walked into a business building. But if your child is a business student, that might be important spending. The problem is, unless you're going to do the research into each college that you put on your list and figure out where they've spent the most money recently, which I think is not really a good use of your or your child's college research time, you're not really going to know if that spending is going to directly impact your student. So even though it's only 10%, I feel like this particular line item is more an indication of, frankly, the financial prowess of a college, as opposed to, again, what kind of educational experience it's going to be able to provide. Okay, the last two items are interesting in different ways. So the alumni donations is something that I'm intimately familiar with, and it's because I am the gift chair for my own class for the college that I graduated from for my bachelor's. And it's very, very much focused on the percentage of alumni who give, not on the amounts that alumni give. So you can see it on my website, so I'm not hiding anything from you. I went to Johns Hopkins. One of our alumni, it happens to be Michael Bloomberg. He gives, you know, big, massive chunks of money every year. We get credit for one alumni when he does that. And when I give, we get credit for two alumni. Really, the question is, how does this impact your child's college experience? It doesn't. It just doesn't. But I know that colleges are focused on this because I know that part of my job as the gift chair for my class, if any of my classmates out there are watching, my job is to get as many of my classmates to give as possible, regardless of amount. So literally, if they want to give, like I graduated college in 1992, so our number is $1,992. My job is to get as many people to give that as possible. I honestly don't think that, you know, having my class all give that amount really makes a big difference. And I think you could easily argue that alumni donations are less important than alumni connections through the Career Center, which would be definitely something that I would look at, and I advise clients to look at when they go tour colleges. I think that career connections and connections to alumni through job opportunities and internship opportunities are much more important to your child's experience on a college campus than how much money not how much money an alumni give, but what percentage of alumni give, which I frankly think is fairly irrelevant. Okay, this last item is something that's new this year. And so the reason that a couple of the other items were made smaller by a couple percentage points this year was to make room for this social mobility number. And it's the first time that US News has done this, but they're looking specifically at the graduation and retention rates of Pell Grant recipients. And Pell Grant recipients are people in the lowest, basically they're high need, low income. And colleges are now, well, US News is now prioritizing, or in a 5% way, prioritizing how successful colleges are at moving these kids not only into the college, but graduating them, because we all recognize that getting into college is not the key accomplishment in one's life. It is graduating and moving on from there. So, all right, next slide. So you've now seen literally 100% of what goes into specifically the US News rankings. And there's a lot of talk in the college counseling community. And when I say that, I mean not only independent counselors like I am, but also school counselors and college admission people. And we all spend a lot of time together in our professional organizations, collaborating and making sure that we're all, speaking the same language. And so Rick Clark from Georgia Tech happens to be one of the people. There are many colleges that are fairly vocal about their dislike for the rankings. And it's a pretty simple reason. And I think Rick sort of summarized it really well. You have a child who has, grades and test scores and numbers, but he or she also has all of these other interesting things and talents that will make him or her contribute to a college community. And in the same way that you don't want your child to be judged only on grades and test scores, colleges want you to go deeper than their number as well. So, next slide. So now we get to talk about what's not in the rankings. Let's see, let me make sure I'm hitting all of the points I want to hit. Yep, so, and part of the reason that these things are not included in the rankings is that it would kind of be difficult to gather this information, because like Yelp, it's subjective, but it's subjective to you as a consumer instead of subjective to the people who operate the colleges. And I hope you're with me on the difference there. When I talk about the type and quality of the educational experience, that's a very personal thing. And you could ask 10 college students, in one major, in one class, what their educational experience has been like on a college campus, and you will get 10 different answers. The rankings don't rank, departments are ranked, but those department rankings are not factored, as you've seen, into a college's larger ranking. So I'd rather, when I work with my private clients, I have them dig into the academic departments that they're interested in, and let's look at what courses will be offered. Let's look at faculty and their CVs. I have students actually click on the bios for faculty members and really dig to see who is it that's teaching in the department that I'm going to be spending most of my time in. This is a really good way to research a college. When we say whether the college has things that are important to you and your child, what that means to me is I have students go into the student life tab or the campus life tab and look for clubs that have activities that your child is already involved in high school or might have an interest in moving into when they go to college. And the reason for that is, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to find a place where your child is happy and successful, both academically and outside the classroom. So what that means is, this is kind of the way I put it, we need to find your people. And if your child is in the Quidditch club or the Harry Potter club or the Ultimate Frisbee club in high school, you want to find a college that has those things, because that's the way we know that the people who do those things are at that college. So I always have students look into the academics, really, really deeply into the academics, and then really, really deeply into the student clubs. One of the funny things I learned very early, and I've been doing what I'm doing for 9 years now, very early I learned that if you tell a 17-year-old, if you ask a 17-year-old, can you pull up a college website on a computer, pull up a college website and let's look at it. They'll look at the pictures. They'll immediately click on the admissions office. They'll immediately go to the numbers and they'll start zeroing in on, are my numbers like their numbers? And we've gotten to the point, where the numbers aren't all, the numbers don't tell the whole story. They don't tell the whole story about your child, and they don't tell the whole story about the college. college. So you need to make sure that they're doing a really good job of investigating the character of the college. Again, both academic and non-academic. And this concept of how your child feels on campus is so much more important than I can even explain to you. Right now, we have all of our seniors who have all their admission offers are now visiting or revisiting the colleges where they've been admitted to give one last chance to get that campus feeling and see the emotions that they feel when they're on campus. Seniors have until May 1 to deposit and to make an enrollment decision. They can only deposit at one campus. So sometimes, for those of you who are planning way ahead, you should plan on April of your child's senior year to do some traveling and do some, final visits to see what that feeling is like. And I would say that a college feels very different when you're admitted than it did before when you were just trying to get in. So it's definitely worth another visit. So that feel is really, really important. And actually, I have, and I'll send this to you, Liz, and maybe you can send it out as a follow-up, or we can post it. We can post it on your website under this webinar, but I have a little 4-page sort of a campus visit checklist that I give my clients just so that they're asking the right questions about the academics, about the activities, again, about the career center. But it's nice to sort of keep track of your impressions of what you were experiencing and the questions you asked and the answers you received when you were visiting a college. Okay, next slide. So this is probably the question that, that people talk about the most as we are entering the junior year of high school and starting to go through the college search. And the way we approach this process is really 2 phases. Phase 1 is college search. Phase 2 is college applications. And I would say that the people who end up with the more disappointing results skip phase 1 and they start at phase 2. They just throw a bunch of names onto a list. They think they want to go to those top ranked schools. And again, not the best way to pick a college. And it's also a very dangerous way to pick a college because choosing by ranking, even if you have top grades and top test scores, when you're looking at colleges with 3, 4, 5, 6, 7% acceptance rate, clearly mathematically you are more likely to get bad news than good news. So that's why we spend so much time on college search. And as we do, these are really the things that we try to get students to think very deeply about. Where do you want to be? How far away from home do you want to be? Can you handle snow? When we talk about college size, it's not because the class size piece and the access to professors piece is really the question. So for students who go to a large public school, like near me, we have a couple high schools that have like 4,000 students. And students think, oh my God, I can't go to a college that has fewer students than my high school. Even if the college is significantly bigger in size, in actual land mass, but has a smaller number of students, it's going to be a totally different feel. But the difference is going to be class size. So what we do, I put learning style on here. What we do is we do something called the learning style inventory. And that helps you determine if your child is a visual learner or an auditory learner or a tactile learner. If they're a tactile learner, they like doing group projects. They have to get their hands dirty and they have to dig right into the subject matter. If the auditory comes up very low, that puts a big question in my head about whether or not they're going to A, be comfortable, but B, actually learn in an auditorium with 600 or 800 students. In some state universities, you are literally going to have 2 years of classes with 600 or 800 students, which could be really intimidating if you are not an auditory learner and if you're not a good listener and a good note taker. That might not be a successful outcome. The other thing about college size is, of course, do you want the sporty, rah-rah experience? I hope that you understand it's very, very true that, of course, big schools are more likely to be on television, with their sports, but small schools have school spirit too. And small schools, sometimes they have more personal school spirit. So like the whole volleyball team will show up to a track meet to support the track athletes. I went to a Division III school. We happen to have one Division I sport, and that happens to be something that I am fanatic about. So there is school spirit at smaller schools. Academic enrichment opportunities, just making sure that the college's academic offerings really meet what your student is interested in. Keeping in mind that, oh my gosh, 65% of college students change their major at some point during their college career. So when I work with 17-year-olds, what I'm really looking for, I tell them I'm not here to box you into a corner with regard to what major you might choose. But I'd like to get a starting point on what that might be so we can sort of look into what colleges are offering. At the same time, I'd like to know that if you change your mind from neuroscience to film studies, that we can literally just walk out of this building and into this building. And don't laugh. I had a junior that I'm working with tell me yesterday that after a couple months of looking at biomedical engineering, she's interested in film studies. It happens. Okay, this student life and engagement item is super, super important. There's an organization called NESSE. It's the National Student Satisfaction Survey, National something survey. I'll send you the link. I'll send the link to Liz and she can shoot it out to everyone who's on this webinar. But what the studies show is that students who are engaged in campus activities they have less depression. They feel more a part of a community, not surprising. They report a higher level of satisfaction with their college experience. And the funny part is they also end up more involved and more generous as alumni. So colleges honestly should have a huge incentive to provide these engagement and outside of the classroom activities, because they're going to make their students become more generous and active alumni. And I would say this, I think that the student life piece is even more important today because we're experiencing epidemic levels of depression and anxiety on college campuses. And it's because kids are, I'm looking for my phone, they're so attached to their phone. And as we know as adults, they think that they're connected and they consider that to be community. But what we know is that it's not personal and it's not really community. And so the more they're engaged on campus, the less likely they are going to experience that anxiety and depression. Okay, next slide. So what I would suggest you do is instead of going by the US News rankings, or really by any college rankings, because they all take some degree of the items that we talked about into consideration, you should decide what's most important to you and what's most important to your child. And you can create a chart and answer the questions for those items for each of the colleges that you're looking at. That's going to be a much more personal way to go through this process and search. Next slide. And again, the result should always be that we're all looking for the same thing. We want your child to be happy and successful. So you have to do the research to make that happen. Next slide. And the thing about finding fit, it sounds good, and it sounds, it sounds really like we're all, looking for the same thing, which we are. But the funny thing is, finding the colleges that fit is actually the best way to find the college to improve your chances of being admitted. Why do I say that? Because most colleges will ask, here, actually, next slide, this is what I'm going to elaborate on. Most colleges will ask students, in addition to one main essay that they'll write for all colleges, many colleges ask students to write what we call supplemental essays, so very short additional essays. And what they're looking for is your personal connection with the college. The more research that you do, the more digging that you do, the better you're going to be able to show how you're connected, how the things that you do and the talents that you have are related to what's going on those college campuses. And what you're trying to do is get the college admissions folks to visualize you, your child, visualize them walking across your campus, being involved in a campus club. These essays need to be really, really specific. So the funny part is, we always tell students, most of the time students come to us and they have, you know, a nice large number of what we call reach schools on their list, because those are the ones that are top of mind. Those are the ones that you know. And the sort of, it seems counterintuitive, but it's really, really true. If you reduce the number of reach schools on your list and spend more time researching each one and finding the personality and the character of each one, and drawing connections, the student drawing connections between himself and the college, you have a better chance of getting in. So the fewer you apply to, the better chance you'll have. I know that sounds kind of weird, but it's really true. And I've actually given a presentation to high school counselors with an admissions person from MIT and an admissions person from Johns Hopkins, and they both agree. We all say the same thing. A nice small number of reach schools, maybe 3, 4, 5, if you have literally perfect scores. If you have more than that, you're kind of just throwing spaghetti at the wall, and you know what? They're going to know. It's going to be really clear. So these supplemental essays are not cut and paste. They need to be really, really specific. I would say this. So I basically said to you that you shouldn't go by the rankings, partially because the academic or the department rankings are not really factored into the college's rankings. So the problem is, some people might hear me say that and say, oh, well, I'm just going to Google top colleges for biomedical engineering and then apply to those. The problem is, you might get a list of those schools that are ranked very highly for biomedical engineering. The problem is, if you don't have the grades and test scores, there's a disconnect here, right? And so it's really important, I would say, for you to learn how to investigate where that middle 50% of admitted student scores is. If your student is at the bottom side, I can't tell, for me this is the bottom, for you this might be the bottom, but they basically report the 25th and the 75th percentile. So again, 25% got higher, 25% got lower. If you're down here in the lower side, you know, that means you're not so competitive in that pool. So what you need to do is find schools where that range is, where your student score is right in the middle of that range. That's a school for which he or she is more competitive. So I think one more slide is our final food metaphor. I really honestly feel this way. The rankings are like a hot dog. It's a whole bunch of mishmash that generally nobody knows what's inside it, but now I've told you what's inside it. And I hope that you see that what's inside the ranking methodology isn't everything you need to know about a college. So what I hope that you'll do instead is come up with some better ways to investigate and research colleges, so that you can help your child come up with, again, a balanced list. And to us, what a balanced list means is 3, 4, maybe 5 reach, 3 or 4 target, which means their grades and test scores are right in the middle. Grades and test scores are right in the middle of the college's admitted pool. And and then a couple safe schools or likely schools, 2 or 3. And this is the hard part. They need to like them because they might end up going there. The more aggressive you are with your list, which means the more reach you have on your list, the better you better like those likely schools, because this is a very dangerous path. And I would say, for those of you who have friends whose kids are seniors right now, talk to them about what this process was like, because I think what you might find is some people who were very disappointed because they thought something was going to happen and it didn't happen. And I hate it when that happens. It's always upsetting to me when somebody says to me, did you hear about so-and-so? They didn't get in anywhere. And whenever someone says to me, didn't get in anywhere, what that says to me immediately is the list was wrong. The list was too aggressive. And you have to love every single school on your list. And that means you have to research every single school on your list. This is what I make students do. I give them a list of 40 or 50 sometimes at the beginning of their junior year, and we just plug our way through that list throughout the junior year. until we found the 12 to 15 that they absolutely love, and they would be thrilled to get an admission letter from any of them. So I think I've made it through everything I wanted to say. And let's see if I can figure out how to do the questions here. Okay, so I don't understand the acceptance. Okay, so, I'm looking in the wrong place, aren't I? Let's see. Well, I'll tell you what. So someone asked about acceptance rate, and let's see if I can draw it out. So we have three numbers that matter. We have the pool, let's see, the applicant pool. I'm writing this out for you as I'm doing it. And pool, and then we have admitted. And then we have enrolled. So these are the three numbers that matter to colleges. So the applicant pool is the big number. The applicant pool is the big number. That's how many kids apply. The admitted pool, so the ratio between this and this, is what you would call the acceptance rate, right? So the way for them to reduce their acceptance rate, so this number isn't going to change because the size of their class isn't going to change. So the only way to reduce this ratio is to make this number bigger. So what does that mean? Colleges have an incentive to bring in as many applications as possible. That's why they go to college fairs. That's why they send their reps out to visit high schools in the fall and sometimes in the spring. That's why they send you all of that mail, because they're trying to generate interest. And frankly, the parent market, you have become very hard to penetrate. So that's why you're getting so many emails and so much mail, is that they're trying to get their message through to you and to get themselves on your list. And even the well-known colleges are doing it, which I just find to be crazy. But that a top 10 school would be sending buckets and buckets of mail, it just seems like a huge waste of paper. But this other number is also important to colleges. So the ratio between the number they admit and the number that enroll is very important. Why? Well, first of all, these are the paying customers, so that's an important number to them. But additionally, that ratio, that percentage, is a number by which they judge themselves and each other. So, Harvard's yield, they call that the yield, the percentage of admitted students who enroll. So the yield for Harvard is like in the high 80%. The yield for Stanford is in like the mid 90%. If you get into Stanford, you're probably going. So they do pay attention to that. But again, the higher that applicant pool number, the stronger they consider themselves to be. All right, so why again? Okay, so the question was, why does that factor in? So interestingly, that particular number is what was removed this year. So I think it's important for you to know that colleges still care about those numbers, but it happens to have been dropped from the methodology this year. All right, so I don't, wait, let's see. I'm looking at.
Does anybody have any questions that you guys want to submit at this time, so we can start with the Q&A? I mean, I know we answer a few.
Yeah. And somebody commented that a high ratio would give you a false sense of the college acceptance rate. It kind of is, yeah. I mean, it kind of is. Here's the thing. Think about it this way. Why would you encourage students who you have no interest in, and students who you have no very low likelihood of admitting? Why would you encourage them to apply? It kind of seems like a big waste of everyone's time, doesn't it? And if you think about why they're doing it, to make themselves look better, it seems kind of yucky. So there you have it, rankings in 45 minutes.
That was, I think we have one more question.
Yeah. Oh, now we got some questions coming in. Let's see. It looks like they're coming in on the chat though, yeah? So
yes.
Let's see. So someone asked, let's see. So let me take the second one first. Someone asked, how would I compare Forbes and Wall Street Journal list to the US News list? So I have not looked at the methodologies. and I would see if either Forbes or Wall Street Journal publish a methodology. I will give US News this, at least they publish their methodology. The other question was, do you have a better chance of getting in if you have the grades and test scores versus if you don't? So let me talk to you about holistic and something that I've started talking with other college counselors about recently. So we've been using the term highly selective for colleges kind of ranked highly. And I've decided that I'm not going to use the term highly selective anymore for colleges. And the reason is that, I guess I need these if I'm going to read. The reason is that I feel like if you are a top grades, top scoring student, you might infer from that phrase, highly selective, that you are the highest and therefore you will be selected. So when you're talking about a school with a 7% admit rate, there's just no guarantee. Like one of my favorite stats is Stanford rejects 70% of the students with perfect scores who apply every year. 70% are rejected. Harvard rejects 80% of the valedictorians who apply every year. So what does that mean? It's a math problem. There's 19,000 seats in the entire Ivy League's freshman class. They literally do not have enough room for every qualified student who applies. So what does that mean? They use the word holistic. They are choosing based on grades, test scores, and other factors. They're deciding who they want to invite into their community. So when I went to college, or when I applied to college, we were told that colleges were looking for well-rounded students. They're not looking for well-rounded anymore. They're looking for students. They're looking to build a well-rounded class of students that are interesting and will contribute interestingly to each other's experience. So grades and test scores are part of the equation, but they're not all the equation. And so the problem I have, I always joke that I'm almost happier to work with like 3.0, 3.2 students because they don't think they're going to go to Harvard than working with 4.0, perfect score 36 students, 36 ACT score. I've worked with, the kids way up here at the top with the top grades and the top test scores, and you just can't assume that it's automatically going to get you in anywhere. I would say this, there are many, many schools that are test optional or test flexible. And when you have a school that's test optional, meaning they don't require test scores at all, or test flexible, what that means is they're placing greater importance on the transcript. So they're looking for 3.5 years, or 3 years if you apply fall of your senior year. They're looking for 3 years of a very solid transcript. And if they see any dips in the transcript, they're going to wonder what happened, and they're going to need to hear an explanation for it. So the transcript, and even for schools that do require test scores, the transcript is the most important part of a college application. Grades, grades, grades. So what I would say to a 9th grader is there is nothing more important than getting good grades right now. When parents call me in 9th grade, we don't even sign contracts with 9th grade families. We start with the middle of 10th grade because there's nothing more important than grades for 9th and 10th grade. If you can find an activity that you can get involved with and you think you can stay involved with it for 4 years, fabulous. If you want to start test prep and you're ready, fabulous. But there is nothing more important than building a solid foundation of 3.5 years of good grades. I feel like I had another point to make on that, but I don't think I did. All right, let's see what other questions we have. Questions coming in. All right, if you want your child to go to grad school and he wants to, then is it not important to go to a well-known school in that field? So if you want to go to grad school, the most important thing is to do well at any college you attend. So what are graduate schools looking for? Medical schools and law schools and any kind of graduate program. Business schools, they're looking for kids who rise to the top, no matter where they are. So my favorite way to illustrate this point is if you're sitting at your computer, open a new tab, Google Harvard Law School undergraduate college. What will come up is a list of the 170 undergraduate colleges from which their first-year law students graduated. So they have a first-year law school class of like 300 students. They came from 172 different colleges. You'll recognize about half of them. And half you won't recognize at all. You'll say, I've never even heard of that school. And you know what I say to that? It doesn't matter that you haven't heard of it. It matters that Harvard has heard of it, Harvard Law School. And the funny part is the half you will recognize, I don't mean to insult anyone, but the half that you will recognize has schools like this on the list: Arizona State University, Portland State University, Boise State University. It's schools that you might think as a parent, my student is smarter than that. I don't want my kid to go to XYZ University because my kid is smarter than that, and your kid might think that too. And my point on this is kids from Portland State University can go to Harvard Law School. So what does that say to you? Harvard Law School is looking for students who rise to the top wherever they are. Okay, how do colleges rank from an academic private school to a public school? Right, this is a hard question. Karen, thank you for this question. And I get it in different forms on a regular basis. So what many people say to me is, do colleges know X high school versus Y high school? Do they know that, this school has a more rigorous curriculum than this school? And so here's what I would say, a couple things. First of all, colleges have regional representatives who travel, and usually they travel in the fall, and their job usually, most colleges do this. They split up the country by region, and they send their reps out to different areas, and their job is to get to know the schools in the region and the counselors. Now, the bad news is that some schools don't get visits. And it's a big problem because by the way, I didn't mention this, but there's 35,000 high schools in the United States. So when you think about your kid who's the editor of the newspaper or yearbook or captain of the whatever team, think about this. There's 35,000 of those across the country. That's who your child is competing with. So it's a difficult, and your question was specific to homework. But here's the problem. We have a grade inflation problem in the United States. So 20 years ago, if you looked at a bell curve of high school graduating seniors GPA, it would look like a bell curve. There were some A's and a lot of B's and a lot of C's and some D's and some F's. That's what it looked like. Today, you're going to be floored by this. 40% of high school graduating seniors have a 4.0. 40%. It is not a bell curve anymore. And what does that mean? That's grade inflation. That means that colleges, honestly, are a little bit skeptical, and they have to be. And that's why they send their regional reps out to learn a little bit more about the high schools. So I would say this, do the best you can of ensuring that your student goes to as many college visits at his or her high school as possible. And the other thing I would suggest is go to those big college fairs, and instead of just grabbing I happen to have one sitting right here on my desk, instead of just grabbing the flyer, I'll be at Butler in about a month, stop and talk for a moment, not you, the parent, but the student. Have the student stop and talk for a moment with the rep, because the person who is staffing that desk at a college fair is most likely the person who will read your student's application. Because again, that regional thing, usually the regional person is the first read for the students in that region. That's the best I could say for that. All right, when visiting campuses to determine fit, what is the best way to get the nitty-gritty of a campus's personality? Yep, this is a great question. I love that you asked it. As opposed to getting information only from a possibly scripted tour guide or a motivated current student. So here's what I tell my clients about tour guides: paid and scripted. They're paid and scripted. So you have two jobs. Number one, knock them off their script. Instead of asking questions that could easily be found on the college website, like what's the average class size, and do professors have office hours? Of course they do. Ask questions that are very personal to the tour guide's experience. So questions like, what's the largest class you have ever been in? Who's your favorite professor? When's the last time you went to office hours? What did you do last Saturday night? Ask the tour guide questions that nobody but the tour guide could answer. And then the other thing about getting the personality of a campus is your assumption is absolutely correct. The people who are tour guides are motivated and happy. So guess what you should do? I know this sounds ridiculous, and you shouldn't do it as a parent. Your child should do this. Walk up to a random kid on the quad and start talking to him. I know it's crazy, and your teenager will be like, Mom, don't make me do that. Make him do it. I do it. I know I'm more closer to your age than their age, but I talk to random kids on the quad because that's how you get the unvarnished look at what's going on a college campus. Okay, salary potential is not considered at all in the US News and World Report rankings. That was a question, and yes, I'm answering that. It is not considered at all. If you would like to investigate salary potential, I have two suggestions for you. The first one is go to payscale.com, and it lists by college what the average starting salary is. Usually it's just by college or university. It's not broken down by major. But what I would say you should do, again, when you're visiting college campuses, your best friend on a college campus is the Career Center. And unfortunately, it's never on the tour. So instead of doing what the college wants, you should definitely do the information session. You should definitely do the walking tour. Schedule an extra hour or two on each college campus you go to and go talk to the Career Center. I would say also schedule a meeting with someone in the department that your child might be interested in, even if they might be interested in the engineering department. Go talk to them, spend a half an hour. So I'm sure somebody would love to talk to you there. No, it's not going to help you get in. It could help you determine, is this a good fit for me? Is this academically going to be a good place? And the Career Center definitely will give you a sense of what kind of opportunities. Ask about internships, ask about career fairs, ask about who recruits on this campus. Okay, so this question we sort of talked about. How do colleges know the competitiveness of your child's school? And then this person says, it's easy to get a high GPA in a non-competitive high school. Well, so this is the problem. You have your opinion of what's non-competitive, and you have your opinion of what's competitive. And the fact that your son or daughter is doing 3 or 4 hours of homework a night doesn't necessarily mean that the school is more competitive. What I would say, though, is this: there is a document that travels with your child's transcript when it's transmitted to a college. All this is electronic now. I know we did all this on paper when we were applying. But the school profile is a document that travels with your child's transcript. And a school profile gives colleges a little bit of context about the educational environment. This actually goes to the I'm glad that we brought this up, because school profile is actually the best answer to this question. So especially for schools that don't get a lot of college reps visiting, they will get the school profile. So for example, what it might say is how many students go there, what percentage of students are on free and reduced lunch, the racial breakdown of the school, whether or not it's a Title I school, how many and what AP courses are available on that campus. What the median or mean or average SAT scores were, how many kids pass AP exams, what colleges students are admitted to and matriculate at. So a good school profile honestly should have almost all of that information. And the funny part is it's on your high school website. Sometimes it's hard to find, sometimes it's easy to find. Honestly, whenever I take a new client, if they're from a school that I don't generally work with, I can usually find the school profile in just a few minutes. And think about it this way: if I can find a school profile in 10 seconds, a college can find a school profile in just a few seconds too, and get a pretty decent context for what's going on at that high school. I would say this though: when your child applies to college, he or she will be compared first against kids in the same high school. Why? Because they've had the exact same educational opportunities, right? So if your child, let's do it this way. Whenever I work with a student who's taken either Algebra 2 or pre-calculus in the 10th grade, that's considered ahead. So we could go to, if they do pre-calc in 10th, we could go to AP Calc AB in 11th, or AP Calc BC if they're a smart math kid. Many high schools have AP statistics, and so they would immediately put a kid who's taken AP Calc BC into AP Stats their senior year. If I'm working with that student, I'm going to advise them not to take AP Stats, because I know that AP Stats is viewed as, or statistics is viewed as the math that kids who can't take calculus take. So I would never want a child who's taking calculus to basically take a step back in math and take statistics. So I would have that student take an online or a community college course in either linear algebra or multivariable calculus. Oops, sorry about that. So that's the kind of thing where the school profile is going to tell the college what's available. And so any students from that school who apply are probably going to go, Algebra 2 in 9th, Pre-Calc in 10th, AP Calc AB in 11th, and then AP Stats in 12th. Whereas my client is going to go Algebra 2 in 9th, Pre-Calc in 10th, AP Calc BC in 11th, and then online or community college calc senior year. So that kid is going to look like he's gone beyond what's offered to him at the high school. So that's going to look better. I hope that made sense. That's my little math example. Does UC, oh, I love this question. I could give you an hour on the UCs. Does UC use an equation to screen out and admit students? So the UC system, there's 9 campuses in the UC system. And I'll tell you what, I'll take the last question last, which is personal interview with admissions officers, because that's how I started. So the UCs have a special equation that they use to calculate GPA. They count the 5 core courses, which is English, math, science, foreign language, social studies, all of those plus art, but only the classes taken in 10th and 11th grade. They also allow up to 8 semesters of honors or AP courses. Out of state students, they do not give extra weight or only get the PCGP a little later for myself, so know how to calculate a GPA. Do recommend recommendations. They don't, the only cutoff is you need a 3.0 weighted to be eligible to apply to the UCs. Aside from that, it's what they call a holistic process. And the funny part is the UCs they tell us in general what factors they consider, but they don't tell us specifically how they make their decisions, just because most colleges don't tell us specifically how they make their decisions. So it's a little bit frustrating. It is holistic, which means it's good news, bad news. It means they're taking life experience into account. They're taking leadership and other things that come into play in the resume and in the essays. But what holistic really means is that kids with lower grades and test scores could get in over your child. And trust me, that day, if it happens to you, you are going to be super annoyed. So holistic sounds really great, but what it means is the colleges are choosing who they want to build the class that they want on their campus. They're doing it for a reason. You don't get to know what the reason is. That's kind of yucky, but it is what it is. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. UC's is the University of California, and it's a 9 campus system. Okay, so I'm going to save this last one for last because it's actually where I started my career. So the question is, what is your feeling on personal interviews with admission officers? So when I graduated from Hopkins, I went to DC. I got a master's degree. I came home. I did my first career. But my little extracurricular activity was I interviewed students for Hopkins for about 15 years. And I trained other alumni on how to do that. It's really a wonderful experience, except when you're talking about a holistically selective school. What it meant was I was meeting all of these fabulous students who were not admitted every year. And it was kind of frustrating. And I've heard from other, highly ranked colleges alumni who have gone through the same experience, and it's very frustrating. So that's the alumni interview. The admissions counselor interview is a different story, because the admissions counselors really are involved in making the decision, whereas alumni are not involved in making the decision. So I would say an admissions interview can generally only help unless you really honestly cannot carry on a 20-minute conversation or 30-minute conversation. If you are super social, anxiety, shy, not good at eye contact, I do not recommend interviews. And there's no judgment. There's a lot of students like that. There's a lot of kids like that today. But interviews are not going to help, because colleges are looking for people that they like. They're looking for students who, will really build community on their campus. And so you have to, bring that to the table in some way. I really don't think there's a downside. I do prep students for interviews. They really need to be able to think on their feet, and they really do need to have done their homework and bring, that research in with them and really be able to show why they will be able to contribute to the college community. That said, colleges today are showing a little bit of concern about the privilege that might be inherent in students that have the financial ability to travel to campus to do those interviews. So some colleges are canceling interviews altogether. Some colleges are allowing interviews by Zoom like we're doing here because that levels the playing field a little bit. And even for the colleges who do conduct interviews, I would say it counts a very, very small amount. So, grades, strong test scores, leadership and deep activities, counselor and teacher recommendations are super important because they illustrate the student's character. How a student behaves and what he or she contributes in high school is a clear indicator of what he or she might contribute on a college campus. So what your counselors and teachers are saying about you is very, very important these days. So that was a sort of a long answer to a short question, but I hope that helped. And I think I got them all, Liz, yeah?
Yes, great job. We're a little bit over, but only 5 minutes, everyone. Thank you so much, Evelyn, for such an informative session. And thanks to everyone for attending today's webinar. We'll be sending a link to the recording tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that email. And to learn more about Revolution Prep tutoring programs and free resources, just visit our website at revolutionprep.com. Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.